I am offering 2 new classes in January. My new class, Freemasonry and the Occult, will be available both online and in person on January 26th at Darkstar Magic in Portland, Oregon. Unraveling the Arbitel will be offered online on January 19th. Get the scoop on one of the best-known Renaissance grimoires. For details on both classes and how to sign up, click the link in the show notes or visit arnemancy.com/January. I look forward to exploring the weird and occult world with you. Remember, visit arnemancy.com/January to sign up today.
Speak the charm of make.
There will come a time on the planet Earth when science and technology will be long forgotten. When wizards will rule the world.
This is the Arnemancy Podcast. Join your host, Reverend Eric, and his diverse array of amazing guests in an exploration of tarot, magic, the occult, and the history of Western esotericism. The Arnemancy Podcast exists thanks to the support of generous listeners like you. Please consider supporting this podcast for as little as $1 a month at patreon.com/Arnemancy. Hello, listeners, and welcome back to the show. It is time once again for the Arnemancy forecast episode. This time I am once again joined by my dear friends T. Susan Chang and Andrew B. Watt. And we are going to be using astrology and tarot to try to accurately predict the horrors that await us in 2025. So far, I feel like every year we are far too optimistic in our predictions, and every year the years keep getting weirder and less comfortable. And so I'm hoping, I don't know what that means for us.
I'm sure it's our fault.
Yeah. I don't know if we should be having more optimistic predictions in order to give the next year space to be bad without being worse, or if we should just try to outdo it and just have really, really pessimistic predictions.
I'm planning on going as pessimistic as I can think I can, and that way we'll at least start from a floor of some kind. And if we wind up in the basement over the course of 2025, it's our own fault.
Aren't you already in a basement, Andrew?
Well, as it so happens, yes. I'm in my basement office.
All right. Yeah. Okay. Well, before we get started, just in case I have new listeners, I would really like to introduce the two of you. So, Andrew B. Watt is a very regular guest on the podcast, not only on these forecast episodes, but in plenty of other episodes. He is an astrologer and a seamster, sewer. Heck, we all sew. All of us sew things, but there are no really good words for men who sew.
Sewist. That's the thing we say these days. Sewist.
Okay. All right, we are all sewists.
And at some point, we should do the sewing and magic episode of the Arnemancy Podcast.
We should. That would be a really good episode. But yes, anyhow, Andrew is also a poet. I think he just said something about that. You just posted something about having been a poet for 25 years. That's pretty
25 years.
So you've been and then over on the other side, T. Susan Chang is possibly the most famous of us. She's our superstar. She's published many books on tarot. She was one of the hosts of Fortune's Wheelhouse, which is possibly like the best tarot podcast that has ever existed. She has a website that lists all of her numerous accomplishments. And both of them, of course, are Massachusettsians, or perhaps Massachusetts. I don't know. What do you call people who live in Massachusetts?
Massholes.
Massholes. Both of them are massholes. but at least they live out in the boonies and not in the city.
This is true.
So in this episode, which is part 1 of 2, we're going to be looking at the first 6 months of 2025, and I suppose what we need to do is we need to talk about our methodology. Andrew, how are you going to be? How did you cast the charts for these months?
As we've said on previous episodes, the way that I go about casting the chart is I look at midnight for the vulgar year. So that's 12 a.m. for the 1st of January for my location, which happens to be more or less on the longitude line for the Connecticut River Valley, aka Springfield, Massachusetts. We use that chart to generate a series of what are known as lunar revolution charts, one for each month. And so the solar return chart for the vulgar year begins at midnight. The sun is at this year at 11 degrees and 1 minute of Capricorn. And then we advance the chart to 11 degrees and 1 minute for each successive month beyond that, and use that as a way of making some determinations.
All right. And Susie, what is your methodology going to be this year? I feel like it kind of changes every once in a while. Like some years you reshuffle the deck, some years you keep some cards out. Like, what are you going to do?
I always shuffle in some way. I'm toying with the idea of just cutting this time rather than doing the finger painting I usually do, just to sort of eliminate the possibility of reversals, because I think there are enough reversals in life that adding them, makes no difference. So I think I'll do it that way. And the interesting thing about the interpreting with tarot is that it tends to be, in doing mundane tarot like we're doing today, it tends to be much more, much less affecty, less moody, less dependent on like what the card says is subjectively pleasant or unpleasant, because it's all generally unpleasant. No, just because it, the news, of course, if it bleeds, it leads. So everything we read in the news is going to be terrible. But I do think that it's important with the cards to give some sense of the terrain in both the positive and negative direction that it might cover, bearing in mind that the elemental correspondences are always going to have some kind of traction. I mean, the elemental correspondences tell you what kind of natural disaster you're going to have that month, generally.
Wow. I do think there's something that we should add this year, because we've had several years where, as you say, we've been very optimistic while the news around us has been deeply pessimistic. And that is something that Neil Gaiman points out in Good Omens, that he has this character, Agnes Nutter, who has published a book of prophecies, and it turns out to be the only accurate book of prophecies ever produced. And for November 23rd, 1963, it mentions that there's a house collapsing in King's Lynn in East Anglia. Now, November 23rd, 1963, of course, is the day that John F. Kennedy is shot in Dallas. Why on earth is this book of accurate prophecies going on about King's Lynn and the collapse of a house? And it's because her own descendant was going to be in King's Lynn rather than in Dallas. So it was much more important for the future owner of this book to know that the house collapsed in King's Lynn than that President Kennedy was shot on the other side of the world. And I think that we should include that in our predictions this time, that this is an episode specifically with predictions for the people who listen to the episode.
Precisely.
Okay.
That's very good. That's very good.
Now, unfortunately, we don't know everybody who listens to the episode.
That's true.
So,
Right.
I think that there's also the possibility that, pessimistic, difficult, tragic news, is ubiquitous at the top level, geopolitics, large-scale disasters, etc., it is entirely possible that some of the sunnier sides of the cards could apply at the individual level.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's also true of the charts that we'll see.
Right.
All right. Well, let's get into it. Would you? Who wants to start? I think usually what we do is Susan draws a card for the entire year, and Andrew talks about the chart for the entire year. Is that
is what we do?
That is usually what we do.
Well, Susie, why don't you draw a card first?
Okay.
Let's start that way.
All right. I have got a card. My card is the Seven of Pentacles, otherwise known as the Lord of Failure. Wah, wah.
Wah, 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 wah.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's really, my friend Mel Moline likes to say failure as yet. But I think the sort of predominating mood of the card is one of uncertainty, of not really knowing what is likely to happen, of knowing that there's the risk that something terrible could happen, but not really knowing if it is going to. Like, in the Rider-Waite-Smith deck, which we use for these draws, the image is said to harken back to the potato famine, which happened about 70 years before the deck was illustrated. And, it doesn't look a lot like the way potatoes grow. I've never had potatoes that grew up, but
they kind of grow underground, I
but
think.
the foliage, the foliage is potato foliage. And the thing about the potato blight is that, when your potatoes have blight, and I have experienced this myself, you can't tell from the foliage that they're sick, right? The foliage looks fine. It's only when you dig up the dirt at harvest time that you see whether you have nice, sound, firm potatoes or sort of these collapsing bags of pus. So,
doesn't that kind of doesn't that sort of feel like a good metaphor for looking at the future no matter what? Like,
that
you can't
true.
Really tell until you get there.
Yes, well, as Solon says,
the potato
you
of the
tell
future.
if you've had a good life till you're dead.
Yeah, exactly. Your potatoes could blight at any time. It could happen to anybody.
They could. But also, I think it's a call for kind of playing the long game, having some stamina, some persistence. It's a Saturnian card. So there is that Saturnian and earthen. So it kind of picks up on the agricultural aspects of Saturn. So there is something to be said for perseverance and long-term planning.
All right. So we shouldn't necessarily call this the potato blight year.
No, we should.
I hope not.
Me neither.
On the other hand, I think it's really interesting that you drew the Seven of Pentacles, because in previous years, I forget what cards we've drawn, but if I'm recalling correctly, we have often drawn either court cards or trumps for
that's true.
for this year. And there is a tradition that associates each of the pip cards of the suits with one of the decans, which is the basis of my own practice. And if I'm not mistaken, the 2, 3,
Taurus 3.
Yeah, it's Taurus 3, which is where Uranus has been for the last 7 or 8 years. And this is the year that Uranus will at least partially be in Gemini rather than in Taurus 3. So we'll be crossing the line. The retrograde will carry Uranus back into Taurus 3, and then next year in 2026, Uranus will be carried over into the line into Gemini. Now, this is one of those places where I can get really, really pessimistic. So I'm going to do that before I even look at the chart, and I hope you'll indulge me for a moment.
Okay. Yeah, we're ready.
Uranus is in any given sign for somewhere between 7 and 9 years, depending on the retrograde cycle. The last 3 times that Uranus has been in Gemini, the United States has been at war for at least 3 or 4 of those 7 to 8 years. The previous time was World War II. The time before that was the American Civil War. And the time before that was the American Revolution.
Wow.
Wow.
So it's really hard to say whether the war is going to start right away or whether we're going to get sort of a foretaste later in the year of this, or if the war is 5 or 6 years in the future. Mm-hmm. But I'm kind of reminded of Abraham Lincoln's line in, I think it's the second inauguration address, where he says, no one wanted war, all worked earnestly to prevent it, and nonetheless the war came. I haven't got the quote exactly right, but it's something like that. And I think that that's kind of the theme that we're facing at the moment, is that nonetheless the war came. The conflict is on its way, even if we don't know what the final shape of it is going to be. Is it going to be an internal conflict, or is it going to be an external one with external foes? One way or another, the U.S. is facing a major transition point in how our society works as well. The Civil War changed what it meant to be an American. World War II changed what it meant to be an American, and the American Revolution obviously changed what it meant to be an American. So later this year, I'll talk about it when we get to the specific month, this Lord of Failure card is indeed one of the principal themes of 2025 going into 2026. And it's really hard to say what it's going to look like, but we're getting sort of inklings of what that might look like, both domestically and abroad simultaneously. So,
wow, we're really starting off shiny. That's for
sure. So there's my optimistic pessimism. How about that?
I love it. Okay, so the year looks grim. There's potential famine hiding beneath a beautiful foliage, and heck, maybe a war. Groovy. Okay, all right. So we're off to a good start. That was anything else about sort of like the general year, or should we get into specific months? Or
so the other thing that has happened just in the last few weeks is that Pluto has moved permanently into Aquarius. We've got 2 signs that are associated with Saturn. First of them is Capricorn, second is Aquarius. Saturn is the only planet that rules 2 consecutive signs. And Capricorn, if you look at ancient descriptions of it, it's things like the drying shed where you put up lumber to dry out slowly so that it's ready for making furniture. Or it is the sail loft where you store the sails and the rigging when the ship is in dry dock. Or it is the vault where you hide your treasures, or it is the cellar that is filled with barrels of stored goods for the winter. In one way or another, it represents piled up reserves that are of no use to anyone. The tool shed, which is locked, is one of the descriptions for Capricorn. Aquarius is freshly plowed fields. It is the mines being worked. It is the quarries being used to pull out stone and gravel for construction. It is lime and salt being harvested. In other words, we have 2 signs associated with Saturn, which is about hard work and difficulty and challenge. But one of them is about laying goods into storage, and the other one is about taking goods out of storage and putting them to work. Pluto will be in Aquarius for roughly the next 19 years. And the last time that Pluto was in Aquarius was the end of the American, it was 1779 to 1799. And that's the time period that includes the American Revolution, the French Revolution, the transition in America from Continental Congress and 13 colonies to the Constitution that we have today, more or less, the French Revolution and the overthrow of the monarchy, the Reign of Terror, and the rise of Napoleon Bonaparte. Like, the next 19 years are indeed about a significant possibility for regime change, but also a tremendous amount of controversy and upheaval. the last time that we went through a period like this, it was the end of divine right of kings. It will be very interesting to see what kind of thing collapses this time around.
Yeah, and I think that actually fits pretty well into our theme of uncertainty in the sense that
Deep uncertainty.
Deep uncertainty. The what I call this decan personally is fail better. And and I think what it speaks to is the idea that we have arrived at kind of a state of stagnation in the various global controversies where something has to give, where there's nothing further you can do. It has fermented to this point that it's about to explode.
Yeah, and we live in a world in which there is no safe place. I mean, when I was in my 20s, I thought, well, if the U.S. and Russia actually go to war and I have a chance to do something, maybe I go to Mexico, maybe I go to Canada. When I was a relatively young man, the U.S. and Canada signed a treaty that said Canada would extradite and or deport young men of military age. Well, I'm no longer of military age, but no foreign country wants a guy in his 50s because I cost more in medical services than I will provide as a contribution to the government. So there's, for me at least, there is no escape. Like, I'm here for the duration regardless. And there's something both deeply comforting about that and sort of terrifying. It's easy to face the idea of an apocalypse or a dramatic change in regime or culture or community when you are young and the possibility of making a name for yourself is a real possibility. It's another thing to face one when you're pushing towards 60 or older. Mm-hmm. And you're like, okay, I'm reminded of the stories about Madame Lenormand in the 1750s and 1760s doing predictions for people in Paris and saying, if you're not out of the country in the next 10 years, you're going to die. And she was right. Like there are a lot of stories of survivors of the terror saying, I got a reading from Madame Lenormand, and she was the one who told me to get out. And she told the same thing to all of my friends, and they didn't leave, and now they're dead. So I'm not saying get out. Like, some of us are planning on sticking around. But at the same time, if you're getting a very personal prediction that maybe it's time to leave, that's worth paying attention to. How's that for uncertainty, Eric?
I really want some French fries.
Don't we call those freedom fries now?
No, that was a while ago. We're good now.
Oh, right,
that was
right,
20 years of war.
Okay, so the chart
we're
of
taking a break.
12 a.m. for my town in Goshen has the ascendant at 10 degrees of Libra, the sun at 11 Capricorn, as I said earlier, the moon at 26 Capricorn. As is always true when we look at these charts, this always makes Saturn the ruler of the year. So there's austerity, there's limitation, there's hardship. But it makes Venus the prime minister. And Venus says connection, growth, beauty, but judicious approach to connection, growth, and beauty with a good level of market orientation, right? This is not luxury at any price, Taurus. This is aware of bargains, Libra.
Aware of bargains. Okay. All right.
And I think that makes for a good combination. When we look specifically at the moon is saying pay attention to your own household. Pay attention to the management of the people who live under your own roof and look out for their well-being and focus on keeping that group healthy, hale, and secure. Because it's the moon in Capricorn. It's saying keep them in the vault, keep them safe, keep them secure, and be ready to bring them out at a later date.
All right. Well, let's get into January. We've already been recording for a long time. So yeah, we definitely should do January. All right, January, let's go. Time to, I have to be on top of things now.
Yes, you have your little bell or something.
I forgot about hold on. Do I have the bell?
Some
Why did you
obnoxious
remind
sound
him?
effect.
Something
I love
like
the bell. Oh, nice.
Beautiful bell.
I'm sure I have a better one. Oh.
Oh, yeah. Very Dies Irae.
Wow.
There we go.
That's the
That will be
bell
the
of the
sign.
Lord of Failure.
It is. I call that the potato bell. All right.
Okay. All right. Are
Okay.
we drawing for January now?
Let's
We
draw
are
for
drawing for
January.
January.
King of Pentacles. Okay.
All right.
Yeah, King of Pentacles.
That's
so,
not bad.
Well, no. I mean, we can always find a way to make it bad.
We could.
I mean, first of all, the first thing that comes to mind is that, a billionaire is going to be inaugurated, right?
Oh,
So-
and his whole cabinet is billionaires. It's
And
just
his whole
billionaires
cabinet is
everywhere.
billionaires. So,
Yeah.
I mean, that is the thing about King of Pentacles. He's got all the pentacles.
Mhm.
And court cards are even more so than the other cards are so neutral in character. I mean, there are positive Kings of Pentacles and negative Kings of Pentacles. But I think that one thing I've noticed is that with court cards, there's often a lot of emphasis on personalities.
Mhm.
In the way that events roll out. So I wouldn't be surprised if we see a lot of action, a lot of news in the realm of chief executives, folks who are at the head of the ticket.
Yeah.
Right.
That seems pretty fair to say. I mean, it's yeah. All right, that makes sense. All right, and anything else, Susie?
No, not particularly. I think we can start there and
Okay.
let Andrew do his thing.
All right.
Okay, Andrew, let's hear it.
We have a couple of big events in January that I think are worth paying attention to. The first is that we have the transition of the nodes. The nodes are currently in Aries and Libra, but on January 11th they're shifting and they will now be in Pisces and Virgo. It's hard to know how that's going to play out for individuals. We were talking before the show started about the state of this condo that I've received from my parents, and fourth house for me is Pisces. I'm going to be wrestling after the first of the year, after the 11th, a whole lot more with where is my family living and what are they doing, and what am I going to have to do about their property. So that is sort of the way that plays out on the personal level, because that's the North Node in Pisces saying more of this. So wherever you have Pisces in your own chart, expect that you're going to need more of that. Similarly, wherever Virgo is in your chart, there's where the South Node is going to be, and that's going to be less of that. Or more accurately, where the shit is going to show up. Because whatever you're eating more of in your life, that has to come out somewhere as waste product. And I don't know how this is going to play out for me, but I can take some guesses, because if the North Node is in my fourth house, the South Node is going to be in my 10th house of career and profession. I'm sort of wondering what that's going to do to my astrological practice.
Oh.
So that's the first thing that I think is worth noting, and it's a place where you really do have to check your own chart personally. The second thing is that the day after Inauguration Day here in the United States, we have the Sun's conjunction with Pluto. This will be the first time that this happens in Aquarius, and it's often the Sun shining light on a hitherto unknown aspect of a planet. So the first time that the Sun shines on a planet when the planet is in a new sign, that's an indicator of how things are going to change. So this will be that first conjunction. Pluto has definitely been associated with wealth and how wealth and power are concentrated. And the sun represents the head of state. So this is very much the way that the head of state is aligning with billionaires and bringing the tools out and putting them to work on day 2 of this new presidency.
Is that all we have for January then?
Do you want to put in a little bit of a bonus here and we draw a card for inauguration representing the administration?
Well, I think because we're a global podcast, it's better to stick with, it's not just U.S. listeners.
Yeah, we don't have to. Let's not dwell too much on the politics if we don't have to.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
Okay.
I'll add one more thing, and that is that Venus, our prime minister, is starting this year in the 5th house, which says spend some of January actually doing things that you love and enjoy and spend additional time with your kids. Put those hobbies to work, have some fun, and don't simply doom scroll through the news, which is not going to make you happy. Focus on the things that bring you happy and increase your knowledge.
I plan on making a lot of music in January.
I think that's a great idea.
Okay. All right, on to February then. February. Susie, why don't you give us a doom card?
Knight of Wands, another court card.
Is it going to be all court cards this year?
Some years are like that, I mean...
Okay. What do we got? What's the Knight of Wands giving us?
I mean, Knight of Wands, I suspect, is, again, personalities, because it's a court card. And I would see that as having to do with kind of an acceleration of things. I mean, Knight of Wands tends to be very, very fast. He's the fastest of the 4 knights. I think I'm getting rocket fuel out of this guy. Probably more SpaceX launches. For example. And I also think the thing about the Knight of Wands is that there's sort of a celebrity effect around him. He tends to be in the spotlight. He occupies those 5 and 6 of Wands Leo decans that tend to really shine a spotlight on people. So there can be a lot of personality, I guess, is one way to put it, involved with this guy, and star power, for better or for worse. I also think that this can kind of have a getting up on your soapbox quality to it. Like in the past, when we got King of Wands, there was King Charles's coronation. So you remember that? Yeah. So, it really, it does mean that there's going to be some kind of probably male presence, to be honest, who gets kind of in the spotlight. And also, in the past, when we've had the Queen of Wands, which has happened, that happened in 2021, our Queen of Wands that year was Simone Biles, but there was also a lot of news about wildfires. Now, February is not usually the time for wildfires, but it's kind of a 12-month fire season these days. So I wouldn't be surprised if there's some kind of like fiery conflagration in the news.
Yeah, particularly if we include the southern hemisphere as well.
Hemisphere, absolutely. That is the time. January really is more the time for wildfires in Australia, but again, everything's hotter now. So
and we're having a big wildfire in California right now.
Oh, joy!
Yeah, that's right. That's still going on. Yeah.
All right, Andrew, what do you got for February?
Well, I have the chart for January 30th at 11 a.m. exact for my town in western Massachusetts. Saturn, remember, is our sovereign of the year, and Venus is our prime minister. Both of them are in Pisces, and they form the 11th house.
Sounds fishy.
It does sound
It does sound fishy.
It does sound fishy, but remember that Pisces is the sign of two fish swimming in opposite directions, unable to escape from one another because they're both on the same hook.
Mm-hmm.
And the 11th house is associated with legislatures. And it's also associated not just with national legislatures, but also state or provincial legislatures. So the sovereign and the prime minister are both in the legislature trying to get people to come together on the same page and also not succeeding, right? That there's limitations and obstacles because both sides of the party want, or both sides of the legislature want different things out of the current session. Meanwhile, Uranus, that planet that is in the Seven of Pentacles position, is in the first house, which means that there is tumult or there is challenge among the people, that there is a rising degree of upset in the general population, and lots of people are loudly making their opinions known to government in a way that creates deadlock. There are interesting aspects between Jupiter, which is in the second house, to the Sun and to Mercury in the 10th house, saying the finance bros don't want government to do what it's planning on doing. And meanwhile, Mars is in the third house, which is a whole lot of police activity or maybe military activity in local communities. So we're looking at a whole lot of opportunities for upheaval and challenge, and a whole lot of controversy in state and national legislatures.
Yeah, I've been a little surprised at the lack of protests and stuff after the election. Like, I feel like last time we had a ton, in 2020, and this time it was fairly quiet.
Yeah.
So maybe people are just biding their time and waiting. I don't know.
I think partly they're biding their time, and partly there was a widespread sense that protests in the streets were not actually achieving goals.
Yeah.
That's true. Yeah.
Plus, there was a pandemic. There was a sense of being out in public is actually healthier than being cooped up inside at a political rally. And now people don't want to be out in public, I find. Like, there's risks involved in being out in public that people just are not taking.
So far, we've done a pretty good job with the pessimism stuff. Let's see. Let's see how March treats us.
So I've already gone ahead and drawn the card just to reduce the amount of lag you have to edit out.
Okay.
And
all
I've
right.
got
Thank you.
The Four of Wands, which is interesting given what
I
Andrew
love
was
that
saying
card.
about Mars, because this is one of the Aries decans. It's the third of Aries. And what's interesting about this is that this card, although it looks like a lot of fun, which it is, it's fun in the context of things being difficult outside. So there's a sense of relief or respite, right? The way that, I don't remember which of us came up with it first, Austin or me, but it's Rivendell on the way to Mordor, basically, right?
Mm-hmm. Okay.
And that could show up in a lot of different ways. It could be like ceasefires or peace talks or something like that. It could be at a sort of a personal level. It could be that there's, some viral trend, on TikTok for things that people are doing that make them feel happy,
Okay.
like that. But there's a very meme-like quality about this card. Because it's a Venus in Aries. So, there's that, the sort of relief and comforts of Venus, but in the midst of that martial tension and pressure. So, the other possibility, of course, is that there's a royal wedding or something.
Certainly a possibility.
Entirely a possibility. But, because it's wands, I don't know. I am getting sort of the feeling that there might be something about about the world's forests in the news, and that is usually not a good thing. But when forests are in the news, it's usually not for good reasons. But let's just throw that out there and see what happens.
Oh boy.
All right, Andrew.
Whenever you draw a card that's associated with a decan, like this one being Aries 3, I try to see if anything is active in that decan. And Venus gets all the way into Aries 2 and then retrogrades. So she's not going to arrive there, at least not immediately. But it's also the case that we have a major council of planets going on in Pisces. The Sun, Saturn, Mercury, Neptune, and the Moon on the first day of March, literally March 1st, at 4 in the morning, are all going to be in Pisces, while Pisces is functioning as the third house. And what I take away from that is that there is a general gathering of people about what are we going to do about local conditions. There's the sense of what are we going to do about local conditions. There's also the sense of what are we going to do about the waterways problem. So one of the ways that could manifest is as major flooding. Another, because February is usually the month when a lot of the snows start melting and Mississippi and other rivers have a tendency to rise and experience flooding. So this looks like a whole lot of water being active all at once.
Do you get flooding along the Connecticut?
Sometimes,
A little bit.
But the Connecticut is both deep enough and wide enough that a lot sort of depends on Vermont snowpack, which at the moment I haven't heard anything about a warning around that.
Okay.
The low-lying areas can get a little floody from time to time.
The other thing about this chart that I think is worth paying some attention to is that the only planet that is in its joy in this chart is the moon. And the moon is in the third house, which is the place of private magic and private religious devotion and private prayer. So there's sort of the sense here of being aware that your community has to come together in a variety of ways. And if you listen to the Arnemancy podcast, one of the things that you can do is say, okay, well, now is a good time for me to be thinking about what is my own devotional work and how am I going to work on keeping my soul healthy and whole during this coming year.
Nice.
Perhaps the listener who is wondering that could join the Arnemancy Discord and chat with some fellow listeners and get some good ideas.
What a great idea.
I did not pay Andrew to open that up for a good plug. All right, cool. Well, March sounds better than February, but it sounds like there are still some challenges that we're going to be looking at. Let's get into April.
April. So I have drawn the 9 of Pentacles, which interestingly, like the previous
Susie, are you only using half the deck?
Well, we've never gotten this one before in a yearly forecast, interestingly.
Okay, all right.
But like the one before, is Venus in her detriment, or rather, the one before Venus was in Aries, so it's in her detriment. This one's she's in her fall, Venus in Virgo. Yeah.
Okay.
I believe Andrew has this placement, Venus in Virgo too.
Are you telling tales about my chart in the middle of a public conversation?
You've been telling tales about your chart, Andrew.
I have. It's true.
That's true. I love that placement. I really do. And it, this card doesn't have, to me, the the only sort of like evidence of Venus in depression or fall is that it's kind of like when they ask you, what is your greatest weakness? I work too hard. She's like a perfectionist. She makes things too beautiful. Right. So
Tough place to be.
Yeah. I actually think given this card and the previous one sort of through March and April, I wouldn't be surprised if there is a resurgence of discussion on reproductive rights issues. which is something that we anticipated a lot last year, and which I think also came true last year because of politics being what it is. But it looks like in those 2 months, particularly April, but maybe also March, that there's going to be an emphasis on reproductive rights, also because there's the sort of 9 pentacles, 9 months thing going on in the car.
Yeah.
On a personal level, the 9 of Pentacles is great for just sort of, house beautifying and making shelters for yourself, and making sure your ducks are in a row budgetarily. It's basically the how I love to be an introvert card.
Interesting.
Yeah.
What about the snail?
Oh, the snail, yes. Well, the snail. So what Eric's talking about is at the bottom of the Rider-Waite-Smith, famously on the lower left hand, there's a very, very tiny little snail. And, I've always interpreted that as good things take time, as well as the idea that the snail is self-sufficient, carrying his house on his back, right? So there is definitely a question of self-sufficiency in here. I sort of think there might be something about the national budget going on as well.
It is the right time of year.
Yeah.
We do have Jupiter in Gemini in the second house, sort of suggesting that the financial issues are of an expansive nature and lots of people are thinking about it. I have heard that we have a substantial amount of U.S. government debt coming due in spring and summer this year. It's an unusually large amount. Something like $8 or $9 trillion is going to need to be rolled over from short-term debt to long-term debt. I may not have the numbers right, but it's definitely trillion with a T at the very least. And
damn,
it is deeply worrisome to people who have government contracts what that means, because who knows what a new administration can do or will do about that. And if you've got some kind of deadlock in Congress, things either may get done or that wrong or get done too late. Along those lines, Venus has gone from being in Aries to being back in Pisces during her own retrograde period next year. She's the minister of the month, and so both she and Saturn are in this place of legislature. They're in the place where it's suggesting that we're both trying to come to a diplomatic solution, and we're facing procedural delays and technical difficulties. And Mercury is there stirring up a fair amount of shit of their own. It is interesting to me that one of the significant indicators for Venus in a Mercury-ruled sign is issues around LGBTQ, right? That somebody who has a strong placement in a strong and unprotected Venus placement in a Mercury sign is usually said to be interested in same-sex partnerships. And when you've got Venus in Pisces, she's exalted in this place, suggesting we are in fact going to be able to make some kind of a deal. But we've got a card that suggests Venus in Virgo. I kind of think like maybe we're making some kind of legislative deal around LGBTQ issues, which have been a major point of contention in a lot of state legislatures, not among the Tories, but Tures. The other thing that's going on in the chart of April, let me look up the date here. I've got it in a different part of this chart. I didn't note down the date. We have Neptune's entry into Aries. And this is the first time that this has happened in a long time. I meant to look it up and I sort of got sidetracked. But Neptune takes even longer to pass through a sign than Uranus does. And again, Neptune will be back over the line in Pisces, but it's it's visionary fire. It is a new enthusiasm for things, and it's in the 12th house. So we see a new long-range vision for how things will be starting in April, and a test of what's coming in the future.
I like some of that, and some of that sounds challenging, but that sounds like a good month. Andrew B. Watt, T. Susan Chang, and I, Reverend Eric, are all offering a divination special for the new year. Go to arnemancy.com/forecast or click the link in the show notes and use code 25isalive to claim your discount before January 15th. Welcome to part 1B of our yearly forecast.
Nice.
We had some technical issues at the beginning of the month when we were recording, and due to the fact that we're all adults with tons of stuff going on, we weren't able to schedule a second schedule the rest of the recording until today, which is both the second day of Couchmas and very shortly the third day of Hanukkah. So we're right at the end of the year. Like we don't have very long left before I'm going to be releasing this episode. And luckily we only have 2 months left in the first part of the year to predict things about. And so we don't need to go over the methods. I think we all remember how those work. And also everybody else will have just listened to those much more recently than we spoke about them. So let's talk about May. Andrew, give us your space wizard predictions for May.
So as we discussed at the beginning of the year, we're dealing with sort of Saturn austerity and structure versus Venus as prime minister, setting sort of bookends on the year. That Saturn says, I want austerity and I'm the sovereign and that's my policy. And Venus says, the program along the way is going to be beauty and creativity. So the first thing that I feel is important to say about May is that Venus is in the 5th house in the chart of April 30th at 11:24 p.m. Eastern time. And so she's saying this is a good month for you to make merry and set some good intentions for having fun, playing with your kids, and building up some reserves of joy and entertainment in your life. That said, Saturn, our sovereign, is in Pisces at 27 degrees in the 4th house, saying restrictions and limitations on families and on household. So some of this is about planning ahead. Some of what the messaging is here is use April to plan for some of the festivities that you'd like to enjoy in May, and be aware that your plan may be limited in some way or restricted in some fashion by what Saturn wants to do. Now, we also have a planet that's sort of acting as the minister of the month, and that's Jupiter. And Jupiter is in the 7th house of relationships. And Jupiter is just below the horizon, so if you are going to start up a new relationship, or you want to sneak off for some private time with somebody that you're in an existing relationship, don't make a big deal about it. Don't post it on Facebook. Keep it relatively quiet, and play it a little bit low on the horizon.
As kids these days say, keep it on the DL.
Well, that means something very specific, and I'm gonna be cautious about going there. But there is definitely a sense of enjoy what relationship you have, but don't make a big public deal about it during the month of May.
Okay. So it's going to be a bad time for posting TikToks. If TikTok is still here.
That's a great question.
If it is, yeah.
Okay. Well, that I think is that pretty much what you've got for May then?
Yeah, I do have one conjunction, and that is that May 18th is the last Sun-Uranus conjunction in Taurus.
Uh-huh.
obviously the Sun and Uranus conjunct every year, but this is the last time that it will happen for 87 years. And it is the explosion of awareness around your soul purpose. So a lot of your listeners are magicians or occultists or general weirdos, and it would be a shame to let this conjunction slip by unnoticed.
So you're saying 87 years before the next Sun-Uranus conjunction?
Ish.
That's a long...
What day is that, Andrew?
May 18th is the date in 2025.
Yeah.
But I don't know when it's happening again in 87-ish years.
That's the last day for magicians in this century to do perineum tanning, is what you're saying.
Oh, my God.
It has now been 0 days since discussing perineum tanning. That's a joke on the Hermetic House of Life.
They're all going to appreciate it.
I see. That's good.
All right, Susie. So just as a really brief reminder for us, not necessarily for the listener, what was the card of the year?
Yes. The card of the year was the Seven of Pentacles, the Lord of Failure.
Okay, well then I just wanted to get that refresher so that when we draw a card for me, I know you already drew a card for me when we did
this one, and I'm sticking with it.
All right, let's go over it again.
Yes, it was the Two of Wands. Speaking of explosions, the Two of Wands is the card that's associated with the spring equinox, or rather let's say the equinox, as it's not the same for our friends in the southern hemisphere. However, it is Mars in Aries, like Mars ruling the decan and ruling the sign. So with this particularly ferocious and extra energy. And it does happen that we have drawn the Two of Wands in our yearly forecast twice before. Once in July of 2022 and once in January of 2023. And in July 2022, I see that I noted that there was a lot about men seeking vasectomies in the news. But, I'm not expecting that to be the case again. However, we can expect with a Wands card, if there are any natural disasters, they're likely to be hot in character.
Okay.
Might see some heat waves. In terms of geopolitics, we can kind of expect there to be issues of sovereignty and borders going on. I think you can kind of see the global. The little globe he's holding in his hand. That was the case in January of 2023. Biden visited the U.S.-Mexico border. And in July of 2022, we had the first operational image from the James Webb telescope. So, so there's this sort of like looking out into far horizons, finding new worlds, and exploring the borders and expanding the envelope, as well as there being kind of confrontational, fractious energy to it. As Andrew was saying, it's an explosive kind of card, so an explosive time, an explosive month. So I think that a little discretion is the better part of valor would be in order.
Okay, that sounds good. Andrew, you have something else to add?
Yeah, we do try to note when the card of the month also corresponds to a decan that has a lot of stuff going on in it. And in the chart of April 30th at 11:24 Eastern Time, we have both Venus as our prime minister and Neptune active at 0 degrees of Aries or 1 degree of Aries. So they're not exactly conjunct in the chart, but they will be on May 1st.
Okay.
And so here you've got this card that's representative of the door of the year, right? We're walking through the door of the year, and it happens to be a year in which the Pope has opened the Holy Door in Rome for the once every 25-year jubilee of Roman Catholics worldwide. If you go to Rome and you walk through the Holy Door, big stuff happens. And here we have Venus, the creative, and Neptune, the visionary, walking through the Holy Door of the celestial world at the same time. So this strikes me as deeply symbolic and powerful. Is the door in Rome connected with the celestial door? I don't know, but there's sort of a sense of the pillars of the world being shook here a little bit.
Yeah. And with Venus and Neptune, I wonder if some of the borders being explored or expanded might be maritime in character.
That is an excellent point. And you know, we had a case earlier this year where the Houthi rebels successfully closed the Suez Canal to Israel originating traffic and Israel-bound traffic without having a navy. And and the Ukraine has successfully denied the Russian Navy access to most of the Black Sea because of successful drone attacks, both by land and sea. So the idea of an organization successfully and creatively changing the nature of maritime warfare in May is a real possibility.
Interesting.
All right. Okay, well that is interesting. Thank you. That's a good look at May. Now let's move on to the final month that we're going to be looking at in this episode, June. Oh yeah,
go
Andrew,
ahead.
You start us off.
Okay, I'll go ahead. June 1st, 2:09 a.m. Eastern Time for my location. We have Jupiter again as the minister of the month. Jupiter is in Gemini in the 4th house, and Jupiter is at 28 degrees in Gemini, so very, very late in Gemini. And later this year, in our next episode, in fact, we'll be talking about Jupiter in Cancer, which is really good, delicious and lovely. Mm-hmm. But this is sort of the last hurrah of that. We also have Neptune and Saturn in that same decan that we were just talking about, the one associated with the Two of Wands. So Venus has moved on, but now we've got the sovereign and Neptune staring at one another face to face. And I think this again sort of pushes the idea of significant occurrences on the water.
Okay. All right.
I've also got a note here that says Saturn in the 2nd, meaning economic trials and difficulties of various kinds. So we're being warned in a lot of different economic forums that we may be facing a recession in 2025 because the euphoria index for the U.S. stock market is very high, and whenever the euphoria stock index is high, then chances are that you experience a low in real performance in the near term.
It feels like we have been getting a lot of noise about, oh my God, there's a recession right around the corner for like 5 or 6 years now. And I'm not sure.
The longer it's delayed, the more risky it is.
True.
But on the other hand, we have the first Jupiter-Sun conjunction in Cancer later in the month. And Jupiter in Cancer is, again, really yummy and really delicious. And this is likely to be a really bright and sunny month in a lot of different ways as a result.
Okay. That doesn't sound like global warming at all.
Yeah. Yeah. I concur
Susie.
about the wateriness. I drew the High Priestess.
Ooh.
And in the past, we have gotten the High Priestess just once. It was in March of 2021. So not COVID year, but the following year. And notable that month for flooding. So, you know, we always ask what kind of natural disaster it will be.
Yeah.
And with fiery cards, it's fire and heat. With watery cards, it's floods. With air cards, it's I suppose it could be hurricanes and tornadoes. And with earth cards, it would be earthquakes. But but flooding is possible in June. The other thing that happened, interestingly, in March 2021 was that was when the COVID relief bill passed. And, I actually do often see policy things happening with the high priestess. She has that scroll underneath her.
The Torah scroll.
So,
yeah.
Yes. Yeah. The Torah scroll. So there tends to be behind the scenes laws being passed.
Right.
In the case of the COVID relief bill, it was beneficial to everyone, and maybe we can hope that something similar will be happening in June of next year.
But that's the problem with the high priestess is it's not always positive, right? It's sort of a revealing of mysteries.
No card is always positive, Eric.
I mean, that's okay. That's a good point. But at least with the
no card is
Fool,
always negative.
I have a friend who says of every single card, "Oh, that's a very good card. I think that you're doing great."
Accentuate the positive.
look at that tower card. Do you enjoy high diving?
Exactly.
With the tower card, I usually emphasize the Martial correspondences, and there are things we like about Mars. Now, the other thing about the High Priestess is that in the same way that the tower is Marsy, the High Priestess is lunar. So so we can expect lunar action, perhaps in any way. Andrew, is there anything significant about the lunations?
The June ingress chart for that June 1st date shows the moon's next aspect will be with Mars in Leo. And it's Mars in Leo in the decan that belongs to Mars.
So the third decan. Mm-hmm.
Okay. Well, Susie, do you have anything else for that card in this month?
Yeah, I mean, the other thing is that, I think with the High Priestess, we shouldn't sort of rule out the metaphysical aspects of the High Priestess, in the sense that there may be, she is a spiritual institution, she's kind of the esoteric version of the Hierophant. So, so it's possible that will come into play, and her sort of, her mediation between the living and the dead. There's always a possibility that issues of, in our world, what we would call spirit issues might come up, but in the mundane world, they don't tend to really report on that so much. So who knows if we'll see anything like that?
Yeah, but people might experience it in their own lives a little bit. Then
they might experience it in their own lives. What's interesting is that I just made this connection. Before I say that, I want to do a quick lookup so I don't force you to have to take it out. Nope, never mind. I'm not going to say it because I'm not going to make you take anything out. No. So I mean, I would look towards ancestor issues.
Okay, ancestor issues. All right.
During that period in June. Mm-hmm.
All right. Cool. I
got another piece I think is worth talking about because we have this moon position being so important with the High Priestess. Mm-hmm. The moon's next aspect is to Mars, and it's in the third decan of Leo when Mars is in the 6th house. So Mars is in his joy in the 6th house, and that third decan of Leo is called the banner, and it is associated with advancing causes or philosophies. And the moon herself will be, I would have to look this up, either in the 11th mansion of the moon or the 12th mansion of the moon. In fact, they're almost exactly on the border between those two. So your results may vary based on planetary location. But if they meet in the 11th mansion of the moon, it's generally favorable for peace. But if they meet in the 12th, it is generally a favorable indicator for war.
Oh, that's and that's going to be a little different depending on where somebody is on the planet, huh?
Yeah,
that's going to be different based on where people are in the planet, and it's also worth noting, as I said, that Saturn, who's our Lord of the Year, has moved from Pisces into Aries for the first time.
Oh my God, I cannot wait for that, man. He's been squatting on my ascendant for 3 years.
Yeah. It's been really rough for me too.
Yeah.
But in any case, we have these three indicators for powerful positions. We have Saturn as the sovereign of the year saying this is the month that any sort of recessional issues may start to bite into your personal finances if they haven't already. We have the moon signaling that there's some kind of diplomatic effort going on, and that this is the point where it may fail, and different sides may engage in mobilization to a greater degree. We have Jupiter saying that there's an expanded role for the family at just about this time. And we have Venus in Aries saying you will have to find creative ways to get what you want. All of that kind of suggests a lot of biting and recessional issues, and do without, make do, or mend. Like those are real possibilities for June and beyond this year.
All right. Okay. Anything else with that?
Don't think so.
Well, I want to shift tracks just a little bit. Since we're recording so late in the month, we actually have a little bit of news about January that I want to touch on, and I want to see if our January predictions talked at all about the potential for a TikTok ban on January 10th.
Yeah.
You know, because January 10th, the Supreme Court will be looking at arguments from like the, national security agencies to see if TikTok is going to continue being a thing. So what do you think? Is there anything in our predictions that has anything to do with TikTok getting banned?
I had King of Pentacles for January 2025. And I don't really see that as having much bearing on TikTok, sad to say.
Okay, all right. Andrew, how about your stuff?
So I called up the horary chart of the moment that you're asking this question is,
okay.
How is the Supreme Court going to rule on the TikTok ban? And decisions by law courts are ruled by the 12th house and by the moon. And the moon is in Sagittarius. Let's see.
Sagittarius, which house is Sagittarius right now?
So it's
where you are.
It's in the 5th house.
Okay.
I'm sort of trying to read the chart. Its next aspect is to Mars.
Okay. So it might be a fight.
So my sense is that there is a fight. And the fight is that the Supreme Court will try to interpret the ban in the most expansive way possible.
Ooh.
And there is going to be active pushback against the Supreme Court.
Okay.
Interesting.
Well, I think that we currently need active pushback against the Supreme Court. I think it would be particularly ironic if it was TikTok that did that and not like their awfulness about abortion rights. But, I'll take what I can get. Okay. Well, I think so. Is that all that we have for that rounds out the first half of the year?
It does round out the first half of the year. But I will note as a preview that at the beginning of this episode, in part 1A, we talked about the problem of Uranus and Gemini. And July is the month that Uranus will move into Gemini. Okay. So we're ending this episode sort of on some quote unquote good news, but I'm not sure that the second half of the year is better than the first.
We have hijinks to look forward
to. I can't tell if this is sort of like a cliffhanger. It is kind of a cliffhanger, huh? We're sort of like, oh, everything looks great, but if this were a TV show, we would all know like, oh no, that means next episode somebody's gonna like, kill a dog or something. I mean, we're going to lose it. Okay. Well, for those of you at home, you can check out Susie's website at tsusanchang.com.
tsusanchang.com.
tsusanchang. And Andrew is at andrewbwatt.com.
And Eric is at arnemancy.com.
That's true, although that's probably where they already are. But I will make sure that there are links in the show notes to the stuff. It's possible that we're all running a divination special. If so, there will have been an ad that you probably just heard that announced it. And if you didn't hear an ad, then there isn't a special. We haven't figured that out yet. But tune in next time. The next time Andrew and Susie will be here, we will be doing a retrospective on the second half of 2024, and then we will have the second half of our forecast up a little later in 2025. So thanks everybody for tuning in. We'll see you next time. Woohoo!
Yay, bye.
This has been another episode of the Arnemancy Podcast. Thank you for joining me. I have been your host, Reverend Eric. You can find Arnemancy online at arnemancy.com, and you can subscribe to this podcast anywhere podcasts are found. If you like what you hear, please consider supporting the Arnemancy Project for as little as $1 a month at patreon.com/Arnemancy. Andrew B. Watt, T. Susan Chang, and I, Reverend Eric, are all offering a divination special for the new year. Go to arnemancy.com/forecast or click the link in the show notes and use code 25isalive to claim your discount before January 15th.